the Antikythera mechanism. The year is 65 BCE. A Roman cargo ship is fighting a storm in the Aegean Sea, somewhere between Crete and the Greek mainland. It is carrying bronze statues, glassware, silver coins, and the usual spoils of empire. Then it sinks. And for 2,000 years, everything on board sits on the ocean floor in 70 meters of cold, dark water. In 1901, Greek sponge divers pull up a corroded bronze lump about the size of a shoebox. It looks like nothing, like something the sea chewed up and forgot. An archaeologist named Valerios Stais examines it and notices something that stops him cold. Gears. Dozens of interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth just over 1 millimeter apart, sitting inside a device that has been sitting on the seafloor since before the birth of Christ. This is the Antikythera mechanism, and it is the most sophisticated object that should not exist. In 2006, the Antikythera mechanism research project used X-ray tomography to peer inside the remaining fragments without destroying them. What they found restructured our understanding of ancient technology. The device contained at least 37 interlocking bronze gears. The front face tracked the Egyptian calendar and the Greek zodiac simultaneously. The back face ran 2 separate dial systems. One tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle, the period after which the lunar and solar calendars resynchronize, consisting of exactly 235 lunar months. The other tracked the 76-year Callipic cycle. Both calculations are astronomically accurate. Both require a working theoretical model of the cosmos to produce. But the reconstruction that broke the story open came in 2021. A team at University College London, led by Professor Tony Freeth, used 3-dimensional computer modeling to reconstruct the front plate of the mechanism. What they found was a display showing all 5 planets known to antiquity: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each planet had its own mechanical pointer driven by its own dedicated gear train. To model Mars alone requires accounting for its retrograde motion, the optical illusion that makes the planet appear to move backward across the sky from Earth's perspective. Modeling that motion mechanically requires a specific understanding of orbital geometry that we did not believe the ancient world had formalized. There is more. The back of the mechanism contained a Saros dial capable of predicting solar and lunar eclipses 18 years and 11 days into the future. The gear ratios required to model the moon's irregular elliptical orbit used a pin and slot mechanism, a small pin riding inside a slot to generate a non-uniform output from a uniform input. This is not the kind of thing you stumble into. This is the kind of thing you derive from a mathematical model. Alexander Jones of New York University identified over 3,500 characters of explanatory Greek text engraved on the casing. The device came with a manual. The mechanical complexity it represents was not matched again in recorded history until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe in the 14th century. That is a silence of 1,400 years. Mainstream scholars have a reasonable response to this. The Roman orator Cicero wrote about a device made by Archimedes that modeled planetary motion. Rhodes, where many researchers believe the mechanism was produced, was a known center of mathematical and astronomical learning. The device was likely a rare, expensive philosophical instrument for demonstrating celestial theory to educated patrons. Bronze is valuable. It gets melted down. The knowledge gap exists because these objects were routinely destroyed, not because the tradition never existed. But that explanation requires you to accept something harder than the mystery itself. It requires you to believe that a civilization capable of producing this level of applied astronomical engineering left no workshop, no prototypes, no failed experiments, no contemporary description of the manufacturing process, and no successor devices. Every technology in history leaves a trail. The wheel leaves cart ruts. The printing press leaves trial pages. This mechanism left nothing before it and nothing after it. It arrived complete and fully realized, as if the tradition that produced it was erased rather than abandoned. Some researchers have asked whether the Antikythera mechanism was not the product of a Greek engineering tradition at all, but an inheritance. A working model of knowledge that arrived from somewhere older, translated into bronze by craftsmen who understood how to build it without necessarily understanding where the underlying astronomy came from. We may never know. The ship that carried it to the bottom of the Aegean took the answer with it. From a machine that tracked the cosmos with impossible precision, we move to a document that claims the cosmos of human time itself was once measured in numbers no living body can contain. The Sumerian King List. Picture a government records office, not a temple, not a mythological text, not a book of scripture. A records office, the kind of place where bureaucrats kept grain tallies, land surveys, and the administrative history of the state. Now picture opening one of those files and finding, written in the same careful cuneiform script as the tax records, a list of kings and their reign lengths. The first king ruled for 28,800 years. The second, 36,000 years. The third, 72,000 years. 8 kings, 241,200 years of total rule. And then the document records a single line: the flood swept over the land. And after that, the reign lengths drop: 1,200 years, 900 years, 300 years, down and down until they match a human lifetime. Someone wrote this as administrative fact, and that is the problem. The Weld-Blundell prism is the most complete surviving copy of the Sumerian king list. It was purchased by collector Herbert Weld-Blundell in 1922 and donated to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, where it sits today. It is not the only copy. Over 20 separate versions of the king list have been recovered from different Mesopotamian sites across modern Iraq, confirming that this was a widely reproduced, officially sanctioned state document. Thorkild Jacobsen of the Oriental Institute produced the definitive scholarly edition of the text in 1939. His conclusion was not that the document was religious fiction. His conclusion was that Sumerian rulers used it as a genuine tool of political legitimacy, citing it to prove dynastic continuity stretching back to the beginning of civilization. The document names 8 kings who ruled before the flood across 5 cities: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. The longest reign belongs to Enmenlu Anna of Bad Tibira at 43,200 years. These numbers correspond, some researchers have noted, to precise multiples of astronomical cycles in the Sumerian base 60 number system. They are not random. They appear to encode something that was, at some point, understood. After the flood, the first post-deluge king is Etana of Kish, credited with a reign of 1,560 years. Etana also appears independently in Sumerian mythology as a real historical king who attempted to fly to the heavens on the back of an eagle. The mythological and the administrative records were being deliberately fused. Why? The flood narrative in the king list connects directly to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a man named Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a vessel and survive a deluge sent to destroy humanity. George Smith translated Tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic at the British Museum in 1872, producing the first documented flood narrative predating Genesis by several centuries. After Smith's announcement, the archaeological establishment went quiet for a very long time. Meanwhile, Leonard Woolley's 1929 excavations at the ancient city of Ur in modern Iraq uncovered something that nobody expected: an 8-foot layer of water-deposited silt buried beneath the oldest habitation layers of the city. No artifacts, no cultural material, just clean, water-laid sediment precisely where a catastrophic flood would have left its signature. Population genetics has recently added an uncomfortable data point. Research published in the American Journal of Human Genetics identified a sharp demographic bottleneck in Middle Eastern genetic lineages consistent with a major population collapse sometime in the range of 10,000 to 6,000 BCE. The same general window the King list seems to imply for the flood. The numbers agree across disciplines that should have nothing to do with each other. The mainstream interpretation is considered and defensible. The pre-flood rain lengths are symbolic, not literal. Mesopotamian scholars used astronomical cycles as sacred numbers, and the figures in the King list encode a cosmological worldview rather than historical fact. The flood is a folk memory of repeated Tigris and Euphrates inundations, mythologized into a divine reset point. Scholars point out that cultures around the world built foundation myths on catastrophe narratives, and Sumer was no different. But the King list does not behave like mythology. It behaves like a transition. The rain lengths don't stay impossibly large and then suddenly snap to human scale. They compress. Gradually, systematically, over generations of post-flood rulers, they compress toward normal human lifespans, as if the document is recording a real change in something it once understood. What kind of imagination produces a lie that carefully, that gradually, that consistently across 20 separate copies, and why does the inflection happen precisely at the flood? From a clay tablet that records the moment time itself changed, we cross the ocean to a book that has been read by no one alive. Not because it was lost, because it is still here, and we still cannot read it. The Voynich manuscript. It has 234 pages, hundreds of detailed illustrations, roughly 170,000 characters of flowing, confident script written in a smooth, practiced hand. Every page looks like a perfectly normal medieval manuscript. Plants, astronomical charts, bathing women, diagrams. And yet in 600 years, not one human being, not one codebreaker, not one linguist, not one artificial intelligence has ever read a single word of it. Not a syllable, not a name. This is not a lost language that scholars are working toward. This is a text that has defeated every analytical method the modern world has brought to bear on it. The Voynich manuscript is the document that should not be unbreakable. And it is. Antique book dealer Wilfrid Voynich purchased the manuscript in 1912 from a Jesuit college in Frascati, Italy. An accompanying letter traced it back to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II of Bohemia, who reigned from 1576 to 1612 and reportedly paid 600 gold ducats for it. 600 gold ducats was an extraordinary sum. Rudolph was a collector of rarities, but he was not a fool. Whoever sold it to him convinced him it was worth a small fortune. Carbon dating of the vellum, conducted by the University of Arizona in 2009, placed the material's creation between 1404 and 1438. The text was written on old parchment. Whether it was written onto new vellum or existing old material, nobody can say for certain. William Friedman was arguably the greatest cryptanalyst in American history. He broke the Japanese purple cipher during the Second World War, a feat that altered the course of the conflict. He spent years attempting to decode the Voynich manuscript. He died without success. His personal annotated copy, classified by the NSA and not declassified until 2014, shows decades of margin notes that lead nowhere. The text defeated him entirely. In 2013, Physicists Marcello Montemurro of the University of Manchester and Damien Zanet published an analysis in the journal PLOS One using information theory to examine the manuscript's structure. Their finding was direct. The text follows the statistical patterns of a real natural language. The letter frequency distribution obeys Zipf's law, the mathematical rule that governs all documented human languages. The word length patterns, the positional constraints on certain symbols, the syntactic clustering of signs. All of it behaves the way a genuine communication system behaves, not the way computer-generated noise or simple substitution cipher behaves. Something is being said. Nobody knows what. The illustrations compound the problem rather than helping to solve it. The so-called herbal section depicts approximately 113 plants. Almost none of them match any known botanical species. The astronomical section shows circular diagrams with star clusters and what appear to be zodiac figures, but they don't correspond to any mapped constellation system. The biological section depicts dozens of small female figures bathing in elaborate green liquid connected by piping systems whose logic follows no known alchemical or anatomical convention. In 2017, artificial intelligence researcher Greg Kondrak of the University of Alberta used machine learning language analysis to propose Hebrew as a possible underlying language. No coherent translation followed. The mainstream conclusion, held by a significant portion of the academic community, is that the Voynich manuscript is a sophisticated hoax. A fabricated document designed to look meaningful but containing no real content, created to sell to a credulous wealthy patron who collected wonders. Computer-generated nonsense can, after all, be made to mimic some statistical properties of real language. The plants are fantastical illustrations. The astronomical charts are decorative. There is nothing to decode because there was never anything encoded. But that explanation requires a 15th century forger to have understood information theory 3 centuries before Claude Shannon formalized it in 1948. It requires the fabricated text to satisfy Zipf's law with a precision that modern random text generators rarely achieve accidentally. It requires the forger to have been sophisticated enough to fool William Friedman, every World War II-era codebreaker who examined it, and the full battery of computational tools brought to it in the 21st century. And then to have told nobody. Forgers forge for recognition. This one disappeared entirely. What if the silence isn't the product of a forgery? What if it's the product of a key that was deliberately destroyed? From a text that cannot be read, we move east across Europe to 3 small clay tablets that were read immediately, correctly, and then buried by the institutions that understood exactly what they meant. The Tertaria tablets. The year is 1961. A Romanian archaeologist named Nicolae Vlasa is excavating a Neolithic settlement in the Transylvanian region of Romania, near the village of Tartaria. He digs through ash and charred bone. He finds clay figurines, a shell bracelet. And then, at the bottom of a ritual pit, he finds 3 small clay tablets covered in pictographic symbols. He sends samples from the surrounding deposit for radiocarbon dating. When the results come back, he sits with them for a while before publishing. Because what the dating says is that these tablets and the symbols carved into them predate the earliest accepted writing in human history by somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years. The birthplace of writing was not Mesopotamia. According to this evidence, it was Romania. The 3 Tartaria tablets are small. 2 are rectangular. 1 is circular. Together they contain over 50 distinct symbols arranged in registers. The circular tablet shows a divided cross at its center, surrounded by symbols. An iconographic layout that reappears in early Minoan and early Mesopotamian cosmological diagrams. but it is the age that changes everything. Radiocarbon dating of the associated organic material placed the deposit at approximately 5,300 BCE, give or take. The earliest accepted Sumerian proto-cuneiform tablets from the Uruk period date to approximately 3,200 to 3,100 BCE. The Tartaria tablets are older by over 2,000 years. These tablets were not isolated. Archaeologist and mythologist Maria Gimbutas, who held positions at Harvard and UCLA, identified parallels between the Tartaria symbols and a broader symbol system found across over 150 Vinča culture sites throughout the Balkans. The Vinča culture stretched across modern Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Hungary from approximately 5,500 to 4,500 BCE. Linguist Harold Harman of the European Institute for Studies in Culture and Society published analysis arguing that the Vinča symbol system demonstrates systematic, non-random sign usage consistent with a functional script, not decorative art. He proposed that it represents the world's oldest writing tradition, predating Sumer by more than a millennium. A second set of inscribed tablets from the Vinča site at Gradešnica in Bulgaria was dated to the same period, independently confirming the symbol tradition across geography. This was not one eccentric find. It was a pattern. The context of the Tartaria tablets makes the situation stranger. They were found in a ritual pit alongside burned and dismembered human remains. The individual appears to have been an elderly adult. Vlasa proposed that this was the burial of a scribe or shaman, someone for whom the tablets held personal or sacred significance. The tablets were interred with the body as deliberate objects of importance. Whatever was written on them mattered enough to bury with their keeper. Mainstream archaeology's response to the Tartaria tablets has been consistent and firm. The symbols are not writing. They are religious or decorative markings, tally signs, clan identifiers, or ritual notation that happen to superficially resemble Sumerian signs due to the limited range of simple geometric shapes that any human culture might independently produce. True writing, by academic consensus, requires a demonstrated systematic connection between symbols and spoken language, and that connection has never been proven for the Vinča system. The resemblance to Sumerian script is coincidental convergence, nothing more. But Harman's statistical analysis directly addresses that objection. The Vinča symbols don't just resemble Sumerian signs individually. They appear in similar combinations and similar contextual positions. The probability of that level of structural parallel occurring through independent geometric convergence is, by his analysis, statistically negligible. And here is the uncomfortable question that the mainstream position sidesteps. If these tablets genuinely predate Sumerian writing by 2,000 years, and if the symbol system is genuinely systematic across 150 sites, then one of the foundational pillars of our understanding of human civilization, that writing began in Mesopotamia, is simply wrong. There is one more detail. The bones found with the tablets were never preserved for modern DNA analysis. They were reportedly lost or destroyed within the Romanian museum system in the years after the discovery. The single most important piece of biological evidence connecting the tablets to their context is gone. Whether that was negligence or something else, we cannot say. From tablets that may have rewritten the story of writing, we leave Europe behind entirely and cross thousands of kilometers of steppe and mountain to Siberia, where a single piece of bone smaller than your finger rewrote the story of what it means to be human. The Denisovan genome. It is smaller than the tip of your little finger. A fragment of bone. Phalanx 5, distal right hand belonging to a child. A girl, as it turned out. She died approximately 50,000 years ago in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The cave is called Denisova, named for an 18th century hermit who sheltered there, which means the cave already had a human history on top of a much older one. The bone fragment was excavated in 2008 by archaeologists from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. Morphologically, it looked unremarkable. Possibly Neanderthal, possibly modern human. They sent it to geneticist Svante Pääbo's laboratory for DNA extraction. What came back did not match Neanderthals. It did not match modern humans. It did not match anything in the database. The entire field of paleoanthropology stopped and recalibrated. Pääbo's team published the complete mitochondrial genome of Denisova 3 in the journal Nature in 2010. The analysis showed that this child belonged to a lineage that had diverged from the Neanderthal branch of the human family approximately 640,000 years ago, making the Denisovans a distinct third branch of the genus Homo, separate from both Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens. An entire human species, previously completely unknown to science, discovered from a bone fragment the size of a fingernail. The Denisovans had ranged across Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, and nobody had known they existed. Then the second wave of findings arrived, and it was stranger still. Living human beings carry Denisovan DNA. Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians carry between 4 and 6% Denisovan genetic material in their genomes, indicating that Denisovans and modern humans interbred in the distant past. Tibetan populations carry a Denisovan variant of a gene called EPAS1, which regulates the body's response to low-oxygen environments. This variant allows Tibetans to live and work at altitudes that would cause serious physiological stress in most people. The Denisovan gene is still solving a biological problem for living humans today. In 2018, the Max Planck team published their analysis of a specimen called Denisova 11. This individual, nicknamed Denny, had a Denisovan father and a Neanderthal mother. The first confirmed first-generation hybrid between two distinct human species ever recovered from the archaeological record. Two species meeting, interbreeding, producing offspring. This is not myth. This is genetics. Population geneticist David Reich of Harvard Medical School, writing in his 2018 book, Who We Are and How We Got Here, calculated that Denisovans interbred with modern humans not once, but at least twice in separate events, in separate geographic locations, across an enormous range extending from Siberia to Southeast Asia. A species that occupied half of Asia for 500,000 years was interacting with every branch of the human family it encountered. And yet the physical record is almost nothing. 3 finger bone fragments, 1 toe bone, 7 teeth. A jawbone discovered in 2019 on the Tibetan Plateau. That is the complete physical legacy of a species that dominated a continent for 500,000 years. Compare that to Neanderthals, who left us thousands of skeletal specimens, dozens of sites, tools, ornaments, and ochre. The Denisovans left virtually nothing. What they did leave behind was one other object, a bracelet fragment recovered from the same Denisova cave layer as the bone fragments, analyzed by archaeologist Mikhail Shunkov of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The bracelet is made from chlorite. Its drilling hole is perfectly circular in cross-section, with a smooth interior surface produced by rotary motion. Shunkov noted the technique required was inconsistent with any documented Paleolithic tool tradition. Something that rotates with enough precision to produce a clean circular bore left no other trace in the record for tens of thousands of years after this bracelet was made. The mainstream response is measured. The scarcity of Denisovan physical remains reflects poor preservation in Asian cave environments and the relative youth of systematic excavation in the region. The bracelet's sophistication reflects general Paleolithic cognitive capability. The mainstream position accepts the Denisovans as a real species and their genetic legacy as confirmed fact. But the silence of 500,000 years of occupation is not explainable by preservation alone. For a species of that range and duration, the absence of sites, burials, art caves, and settlement debris is not a gap in the record. It looks more like an erasure of one. From a Siberian cave and a fingertip, we cross the entire Pacific to an island where a city rose from the ocean itself, built by hands that left no trail of how they did it. Nan Madol. There is a city built on water. Not beside water, not on a riverbank or a harbor shore. On water. 92 artificial islands, each one a raised platform of interlocked basalt columns rising from a tidal lagoon off the eastern coast of the island of Pohnpei in the western Pacific Ocean. At high tide, the lagoon fills and the city becomes a grid of stone corridors and channels. At low tide, you can walk between the platforms and look up at walls 7.5 meters high, built from prismatic basalt logs stacked in alternating horizontal and vertical layers like a massive black log cabin, fitted without mortar, without plaster, without anything holding them together except their own weight and the precision of whoever placed them. Local tradition on Pohnpei says two sorcerer brothers named Otlisipa and Ottosopa flew the stones here from across the sea. The mainstream world calls that a legend, but the mainstream world has never explained how it was actually done. Nan Madol was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016. UNESCO's own assessment described it as representing outstanding universal value while simultaneously expressing serious concern about its deteriorating condition. The site contains an estimated 750,000 metric tons of prismatic basalt. The logs weigh between 5 and 50 tons each. The nearest confirmed geological source of this specific basalt type is a quarry at Soke's Rock, approximately 30 kilometers away across open Pacific water. Geochemical analysis by archaeologist William Ayers of the University of Oregon confirmed the basalt matches Pohnpei sources. The stones didn't come from another island. They came from across the island, across 30 kilometers of open ocean in outrigger canoes with no recorded mechanism for doing so. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal samples from the core construction layers conducted by Pohnpei's state archaeologist Rufino Mauricio and confirmed by subsequent independent studies consistently places the main construction period around 1200 CE, with some foundational platforms potentially dating back to the 1st century CE or earlier. The Saudalur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei from Nan Madol for approximately 500 years, claimed divine descent and used the city as an exclusive priestly and administrative center. No commoners lived there. The city existed purely as a seat of sacred power. Then there is the matter of the basalt itself. Some of the columns at Nan Madol carry residual magnetic anomalies. Their natural magnetic orientation is inconsistent with their current placement, suggesting either the columns were rotated significantly from their original volcanic orientation when placed, or that the magnetic field has shifted since they were laid. What either possibility means in practical terms, nobody has fully worked out. The largest structure, the tomb of Nan Dewas, has walls rising 7.5 meters with basalt sections up to 1 8/10 meters thick. It was reportedly entered and its contents removed before serious Western archaeological excavation began at the site, which means nobody in the scientific community has a complete record of what was inside. A 2016 magnetometer survey identified subsurface anomalies beneath the lagoon floor around the city that may indicate additional submerged structures. No funded excavation has followed that survey. The mainstream explanation for Nan Madol is organized communal labor across generations. The Saudeleur dynasty had the political authority to mobilize Pohnpei's population for sustained construction projects. Log rollers, rafts, and ropes could move the basalt logs across the lagoon over time. It is slow, but it is achievable. The oral traditions about sorcerers flying stones are cultural metaphors for leadership and sacred knowledge, not literal accounts of levitation. But the log roller explanation requires a road. Somewhere between the Saucus quarry and the construction site, thousands of tons of basalt had to travel overland before reaching the water. Every megalithic transport project in history has left that trail. Worn surfaces, discarded stones, ramp debris, broken logs. At Nan Madol, there is nothing between the quarry and the city except ocean. The process that moved 750,000 tons of rock left no physical evidence of itself. And that is not how engineering works. Engineering leaves scars. Whatever moved those stones did not. From a city that defies what we know about ancient logistics, we travel south and east, to a continent that history says no ancient civilization ever reached, where someone carved a royal inscription in the sandstone and then let 60 centuries of silence cover it. The Gosford glyphs. Australia was supposed to be the last place. The most remote inhabited continent on Earth, sealed off from the ancient world by thousands of kilometers of open ocean in every direction. The Dutch made first recorded European contact in 1606. Captain Cook charted the eastern coast in 1770. Before that, according to the official account, the Aboriginal Australians had the continent entirely to themselves for 65,000 years, with no documented contact from any outside civilization. Which is why what sits in a sandstone ravine 60 kilometers north of Sydney, in the hills above Gosford in New South Wales, is either the most important underfunded archaeological site on Earth or the most elaborate unexplained hoax in the Southern Hemisphere. Because carved into the protected walls of that narrow gorge are, by various counts, somewhere between 250 and 300 individual hieroglyphic symbols. And at least one of them is a cartouche. A cartouche is the oval ring used in Egyptian hieroglyphic writing to enclose the name of a pharaoh. It is not a generic symbol. It is not a coincidental shape. It is a specific, highly conventionalized element of Egyptian scribal practice that required training to use correctly. It appears in context among the Gosford carvings. The New South Wales Department of Environment formally noted the existence of the carvings in a 1983 report. No determination of authenticity was made. The carvings gained wider attention in the 1970s and 80s as amateur researchers began photographing and transcribing the site. In 2012, independent Egyptologist Mohammed Ibrahim and researcher Youssef Abdul Hakim Aoyan visited and offered a translation. Their reading described a funerary narrative. An Egyptian expedition that had traveled to a foreign land, in which a prince named Nefer-Jesib died and was buried far from home. The carved sequence reportedly includes prayers for safe passage to the afterlife, written in a script style consistent with Old Kingdom Egypt, roughly 2500 to 2200 BCE. Near the main glyph walls, researchers have identified a flat sandstone slab bearing a carved figure they identify as Anubis, the jackal-headed Egyptian god of embalming. If the Anubis carving connects to the main inscription, the site would represent a complete funerary complex: the narrative, the invocation, and the marker of a tomb. Below the main carving wall, In the floor of the ravine, researchers have claimed for decades that there is a sealed chamber. It has not been officially excavated. No government body has funded a proper dig. The Australian Archaeological Establishment's official position is that the Gosford glyphs are a modern forgery, almost certainly carved in the early to mid-20th century by enthusiasts inspired by the global obsession with Egyptology that followed Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. That is a defensible position. The glyphs contain signs that some Egyptologists identify as errors inconsistent with trained scribal practice. The translation offered by Ibrahim and Aoyan has not been peer-reviewed by accredited academic Egyptologists. Modern forgeries have fooled serious researchers before. These are legitimate objections. But the forgery theory has its own problems. It requires someone in 1920s rural New South Wales to have carved 300 symbols into a remote ravine, correctly deployed a cartouche in context, invented a plausible funerary narrative, and then maintained total silence about it for the rest of their life. There is no known individual, no documentary evidence, no attributed authorship. The carvings were not discovered by researchers looking for them. They were found by people walking in the bush. And here is the detail that sits most uncomfortably. A toxicologist named Svetlana Balabanova of the Munich State Museum of Anthropology published findings in 1992 reporting cocaine and tobacco residues in Egyptian mummies from around 1000 BCE. Cocaine is a New World plant. Tobacco is a New World plant. Neither should appear in an Egyptian mummy. If Balabanova's findings are accurate, and they have been contested but never fully refuted, then ancient Egyptians had contact with the Americas or the Pacific long before recorded history allows. The Gosford glyphs would not be impossible in that world. They would simply be one more piece of a connection that the official timeline refuses to accommodate. The sealed chamber in the ravine floor remains sealed. Nobody has looked. From carvings that may record civilization's farthest reach, we cross the Mediterranean to the heart of the empire that documented everything, and find the one secret it kept absolutely. The Roman dodecahedra. The Roman Empire built roads that lasted 2,000 years. They wrote down their military manuals, their tax codes, their agricultural practices, their engineering specifications, their recipes, their love letters, and their opinions about everything from the best sand for concrete to the optimal harvest time for asparagus. Pliny, the Elder's Natural History, runs to 37 volumes and catalogs virtually every manufactured object, tool, and instrument in the ancient world. Vitruvius documented construction techniques in exhaustive detail. They were not a civilization that left things undocumented. Which is why the Roman dodecahedra are one of the most unsettling objects in the history of archaeology. Because the Romans made hundreds of them, distributed them across the entire empire, used them for what appears to have been a very long time, and never wrote a single word about what they were. A Roman dodecahedron is a hollow bronze object with 12 pentagonal faces. Each face has a circular hole of a different diameter. Each of the 20 corners carries a small bronze knob. They range in size from 4 to 11 centimeters. They are not rough or experimental. They are carefully, consistently, and skillfully made. Over 130 confirmed specimens have been catalogued across 12 countries: France, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, and Syria, among others. The distribution covers the full geographic extent of the Roman imperial period. France and the Rhine frontier have the highest concentrations. New ones are still being found. In June of 2023, one of the largest and best preserved specimens ever recovered in Britain was discovered in Norton Disney, Lincolnshire, by the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, 8 centimeters in diameter, found in a hoarding context alongside coins, suggesting intentional concealment rather than accidental loss. The specimens show clear evidence of regular handling. The exterior surfaces are polished smooth at grip points. Some have reported traces of wax residue in the interior cavity, suggesting the hollow space was used for something. The deposition pattern is consistent and strange. Every known dodecahedron was found either in a hoarding or ritual context, buried with coins or sacred objects, or as a stray find with no context at all. Not one has been found in a workshop, a production site, or alongside other manufacturing debris. There is no evidence of where they were made, no molds, no scrap bronze, no failed casts. Researchers have proposed many functions. A knitting gauge for sizing Legionnaire gloves with different hole sizes for different wool thicknesses, a surveying instrument, a toy, a military standard holder, a candlestick. Researcher G.M.C. Wagemans published analysis in 2012 proposing that the geometry of the holes could be used as a handheld astronomical instrument for determining optimal agricultural planting dates by measuring the sun's angle through specific holes at the equinoxes. The geometry, he demonstrated, actually works for that purpose. But the mainstream response to all proposed functions is the same. Maybe, but we cannot know. And that is true. We genuinely cannot know, because in the entire surviving corpus of Roman literature across 5 centuries of empire, the dodecahedra are never mentioned. Not once. Not in Pliny, not in Vitruvius, not in any military record, medical text, ritual inventory, or private letter. The most literate civilization in the ancient Western world documented hundreds of common objects whose functions we already know perfectly well, and said nothing about these. Some researchers have proposed a connection to mystery cults. Roman religious life included multiple traditions, Mithric, Orphic, and others, whose practices were protected by absolute oaths of secrecy so complete that we still don't fully understand their rituals 2,000 years later. The consistent material of bronze, the consistent geometry of the dodecahedron, which Plato had specifically identified in Timaeus as representing the shape of the cosmos itself, and the deposition in concealed or sacred contexts all fit the profile of a protected ritual instrument. The silence isn't accidental in this interpretation. The silence was the entire point. Some things were not written down because writing them down was forbidden. 130 identical secret objects spread across a continent kept out of every text for 5 centuries. The Romans were many things. Careless was not one of them. From an empire that kept one perfect secret, we sail into the Aegean to an island where a single clay disc was produced using technology the world would not invent again for 3,000 years, in a language nobody alive has ever spoken. The Phaistos disc. Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440 CE. The movable type system, the ability to create preformed letter stamps, press them into a surface, and reproduce text mechanically, was considered one of the transformative technologies of human civilization. It ended the Middle Ages. It produced the Renaissance. It made mass literacy possible. Except that sitting in a display case in the Heraclean Archaeological Museum in Crete is a fired clay disc from 1700 BCE, and it was made with individual stamps. 45 individual preformed stamps pressed into soft clay in a spiral, producing 241 individual tokens grouped into 61 sign clusters. Someone in the Bronze Age Aegean owned a set of movable type, and then that technology vanished for 3,160 years. Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier discovered the disc on July 3, 1908, in a basement room of the Minoan Palace at Phaistos on the southern coast of Crete. It was found alongside Linear A tablets and pottery firmly dated to the Middle Minoan III period, establishing the deposit context as approximately 1700 BCE. Pernier recognized it immediately as extraordinary. Arthur Evans, who had excavated Knossos and established the framework of Minoan civilization as a field, examined the disk in 1909 and declared it without parallel in the ancient world. That designation has never been revised in over a century of subsequent research. The disk measures between 15.8 and 16.5 centimeters in diameter. Both sides are inscribed. The 45 distinct sign types are consistent in number with a syllabary, a writing system in which each sign represents a syllable of spoken language rather than an individual sound or a whole word. That number is too large for an alphabet and too small for a logographic system. Something specific is being encoded. In 2014, researcher Gareth Owens of the Technological Educational Institute of Crete published analysis proposing that one sign sequence appearing 13 times across the disk represents a repeated invocation, possibly a divine epithet or a goddess title. His analysis has not achieved academic consensus, but the repetition of that sequence is itself significant. 13 appearances of the same cluster in a spiral text of 241 tokens is statistically too frequent for coincidence. The manufacturing implication of the stamping technique is what the mainstream account struggles most with. The stamps used to produce the disk were pre-formed tools, not styluses or carved seals applied freehand. Each of the 45 signs was made by a dedicated individual stamp pressed into the clay before firing. That means someone owned a complete set of 45 distinct impression tools, kept them organized, and used them in deliberate sequence. No stamp tools have ever been found. No practice discs with incomplete or incorrect sequences have been found. No workshop debris of any kind related to this manufacturing process has been identified anywhere in the Minoan archaeological record. The disk stands completely alone. Thermoluminescence dating of the disk itself, the most direct method for confirming or challenging the 1700 BCE attribution, has never been permitted by the Heraklion Museum. The dating rests entirely on the stratigraphic context of surrounding materials rather than direct testing of the object. The museum has declined every request to conduct non-destructive thermoluminescence analysis. The reason given is preservation. Some researchers have asked whether preservation is the only reason. The mainstream interpretation holds that the disk is a genuine Minoan artifact, likely ritual or votive in nature. Its uniqueness reflects the fragility of clay. Similar objects simply didn't survive. The stamping technique is a natural development for any culture with engraved seals, which Minoan culture used extensively. The script is a local administrative or religious dialect of which no other examples have been preserved, but the explanation that similar objects didn't survive requires an industrial process to have been invented, applied to a single object, and then completely discontinued with no workshop, no apprentice, and no successor for 3,000 years. Technology doesn't do that. It leaves trails of adoption and adaptation. The Phaistos disk left nothing except itself. It is finished, confident, and completely alone. Some researchers have proposed it was imported rather than locally made, brought to Crete from the Levant or Anatolia as a diplomatic or sacred object. That would explain its isolation from all other Minoan material. An object rare enough and powerful enough to be kept in a palace basement in a specific room away from the administrative archives, not a tablet, a relic. From a disk that used tomorrow's technology in yesterday's world, we make our final journey. East across the whole of Europe, across the Urals, into Russia, where a professor visiting a village garden found a stone slab that, if genuine, doesn't just challenge one detail of recorded history. It challenges the entire premise, the Dashka stone. In 1999, a professor at Bashkir State University in Russia named Alexander Chuvyarov received a tip from a local historian. There was a strange slab in the village of Chandar in the Bashkortostan Republic near the southern Ural Mountains. Villagers had been using it as a doorstep. When Chuvyarov arrived and cleared the earth around it, he found a white stone tile 148 centimeters tall, weighing over a ton, covered in raised relief. He recognized the terrain, the rivers, the ridgelines, the topography of the Ural region south of his own university, rendered in three-dimensional relief with a precision that left him standing in a stranger's garden, not quite believing what he was looking at. Because the kind of map you produce with raised topographic relief requires knowing what the land looks like from above. It requires an aerial perspective. And the geological analysis of the stone itself suggested it had been sitting in that garden for a very long time. The slab Chuvyarov cataloged is now known as the Dashka stone, or the map of the creator. It measures 148 centimeters by 106 centimeters by 16 centimeters and is composed of three distinct layers. The base layer is dolomite. Above it sits a middle layer of diopside glass, a silicate mineral that requires temperatures exceeding 1,300 degrees Celsius to produce and does not form naturally within dolomite formations. Above that is a white calcium porcelain surface on which the topographic relief is rendered. The composite three-layer structure implies deliberate manufacture of the display surface. Natural geological processes produce dolomite formations. They do not produce diopside glass sandwiched between dolomite and precision porcelain. Chuvyarov's team submitted samples to multiple Russian scientific institutes, including the Institute of Geology of the Ufa Scientific Center of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The results placed the dolomite substrate at an age that fell far outside any period of known human civilization. That figure has been disputed and the methodology questioned, and the critical distinction the mainstream response correctly draws is that dating the rock substrate tells you when the rock formed, not when any carving on its surface was made. That is a legitimate scientific objection. The age of the base material is not necessarily the age of the map. What is harder to dismiss is what the map appears to show. Chuvyarov identified the topographic features as corresponding to the Ural River, the Belaya River, and the mountain ridgelines of the southern Urals. The correspondence was not vague or approximate. It was specific enough that he recognized the region. But the map also shows two large parallel channel systems running alongside the natural river courses that do not correspond to any known natural waterway or any documented historical infrastructure project. By Chuvyarov's calculation, these channels would represent a hydraulic network of approximately 12,000 kilometers of engineered waterways. No civilization we know of built anything at that scale in the Ural region. No civilization we know of built anything at that scale anywhere. The slab also carries an inscription in an unknown script. Initial analysis failed to identify a match with any known writing system. The inscription remains undeciphered. As of the most recent available information, the slab is stored at Bashkir State University in Ufa. Only one independent team outside Russia has physically examined it. No peer-reviewed paper on the Dashka stone has appeared in a major Western geology or archaeology journal. The entire evidentiary record rests on Chuvyarov's own publications and Russian-language institutional reports. That is a serious evidentiary limitation, and it is fair to say that the case for the Dashka stone rests on far less independently verified evidence than anything else on this list. But the question it raises is the one that all 10 items on this list have been circling from the beginning. The mainstream explanation for the Dashka stone is natural geological formation, human pattern recognition imposing topographic meaning on random surface features. Maybe. That is genuinely possible. But the diopside glass layer does not form naturally in dolomite. Somebody made the middle layer of that slab at high temperature deliberately. And if somebody made it, the question of who and when and what they were mapping from above the Ural Mountains does not resolve into any comfortable answer. It resolves into the same silence that surrounds the Denisovan bracelet, the Antikythera mechanism, the sealed chamber at Gosford, and the vanished stamp tools of Phaistos. Not the silence of things that never existed, the silence of things that were buried. 10 objects, 10 impossibilities, and the same shape underneath all of them. A machine with no ancestors and no descendants. A royal record of kings who lived for 40,000 years. A book that has defeated every codebreaker for 6 centuries. Clay tablets that pushed the birth of writing back a full millennium. A species discovered from a fingernail of bone. A city built on the ocean with no physical record of how it got there. An Egyptian inscription on an Australian cliff face 60 centuries before documented contact. A pan-imperial Roman secret kept out of every written record for 500 years. A clay disc manufactured with printing technology 3,000 years before Gutenberg. And a stone map with an engineered glass layer that shows a civilization's hydraulic infrastructure that has never been attributed to any civilization. The mainstream positions on all 10 of these are not stupid. Convergent development is real. Preservation is genuinely poor in many environments. Pattern recognition is a documented cognitive bias. Forgeries happen. Rock substrates predate their carvings. These are legitimate scientific principles, and researchers who apply them are doing their jobs. The issue is not that the mainstream explanations exist. The issue is that they do not account for the accumulation. One anomaly is a curiosity. 2 is a coincidence. 10, arranged across every continent, every era, and every discipline, each one pointing at the same gap in the official record. That starts to look like a pattern. The pattern is this. There are objects and documents in the archaeological record that are too sophisticated for the civilization they were supposedly produced by, and the evidence that would resolve the question in either direction has a consistent tendency to disappear. Bones get lost, maps get stored away, chambers stay sealed, museums decline permission for dating, records of provenance are misplaced. Perhaps all of that is institutional inertia, underfunding, and the bureaucratic inertia of large academic systems. Perhaps it is something more deliberate. We cannot know. But what we can observe is the shape of what's absent, and that shape is itself a kind of evidence. History is not a record of everything that happened. It is a record of what the people with the resources to preserve things decided to keep. Every item on this list reached us despite that filter. Which means the fuller picture, the one that would actually answer these questions, is somewhere we have not been allowed to look yet. Most people sit with these objects and accept the first comfortable explanation offered to them. They move through museums and see dusty curiosities. They read the placard and move on. You didn't. You followed all 10 of these to their edges and stayed there. That is not passive consumption. That is the beginning of something. This channel exists for people who notice when the official account has load-bearing holes in it. For people who understand that the most important question in any field of knowledge is the one that gets the least institutional funding. This is your archive. Hit subscribe and lock in your place in it. And then go to the comments and do one thing. Pick the single item from this list where you believe the mainstream explanation is simply structurally unable to account for the evidence and build the argument. Not a feeling, a case. Show your work. We want to see what you find. Every civilization that has ever existed believed it was the beginning. The Romans looked at Egypt and went quiet. Egypt pointed its temples at stars and encoded its measurements in stone with a precision we are still reverse engineering. Whatever they were pointing at, whatever knowledge they were preserving in that precision, they believed it was older than them too. We are not the start of this story. The objects in this video were buried because someone decided they needed to stay hidden. The fact that they surfaced anyway, that you are looking at them right now, means the burial didn't hold. The truth has a way of coming back up. Subscribe and keep digging.